By April 28, 1945, Berlin could hardly pass for a functioning city. Smoke drifted low enough to sting the eyes. Entire streets had been pressed flat. Soviet artillery hit so often that survivors later said the silence between blasts felt stranger than the noise, as if the city itself had briefly stopped breathing. Along Wilhelmstrasse, fires burned without interruption. 55 feet beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden sat a reinforced concrete bunker, built to withstand heavy bombing. Adolf Hitler was still down there. He was 56. His left hand trembled, apparently the result of advanced Parkinsonian symptoms. Not long before, he had commanded armies spread across much of Europe. By then, his real authority seems to have covered only a shrinking patch of central Berlin. Telephones rang in tight corridors lined with military maps, though those maps had begun to resemble wishful thinking more than reality. A regime that once staged grand rallies now ran on generators, paperwork, and habit inside a stale underground maze. People tend to picture shouting and chaos in that bunker. The surviving accounts point somewhere quieter. Traudl Junge later remembered him speaking in a low, measured voice, even as Soviet troops crossed the Landwehr Canal less than 2 kilometers away. That calm might suggest discipline, or exhaustion, or simply a man who had run out of moves. Defeat itself was no revelation at the end. On April 22nd, during a briefing, he admitted the war was lost. What unsettled him more, it appears, was news that Heinrich Himmler had tried to negotiate with the Western Allies through Swedish intermediaries. Hitler saw betrayal. From another perspective, it looks like a last-ditch attempt to salvage something from collapse. Around 1 a.m. on April 29th, with artillery shaking dust loose from the ceiling, he dictated a political testament and a personal will. 3 typed pages. Himmler and Hermann Goering were expelled from the party. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz was named successor. Even with the city disintegrating overhead, formalities still mattered. Titles were reassigned. Responsibility was portioned out carefully, as if the structure might hold if the paperwork stayed tidy. That insistence on order feels telling. Hitler had built his image around struggle, loyalty, endurance. In that framework, surrender equaled moral failure. Whether he truly believed that to the end, or felt compelled to act as though he did, is harder to say. Shortly after midnight that same day, he married Eva Braun in a small sitting room. A municipal official had been escorted through shellfire to conduct the ceremony. The room held little: a table, a couple of chairs, a portrait of Frederick the Great. Braun signed her name, then corrected it to Eva Hitler, smiling as she did. Some later framed the marriage as a gesture of defiance. It may have been less dramatic than that. Possibly a final administrative alignment. Personal life brought into line with political identity before both closed. Later, cyanide capsules were tested. Blondie, his German shepherd, was used to confirm they worked. The dog died quickly. The records describe the decision in clinical terms, though reading them now, it is difficult not to sense a chill in the calculation. Soviet capture was a real possibility, and fear of what that might involve lingered over everyone below ground. By the morning of April 30th, Soviet troops were within roughly 500 meters. The Reichstag was under direct assault. Ammunition across Berlin was nearly gone. Some Volkssturm units consisted of teenage boys holding single-shot anti-tank weapons and instructions to defend positions already half destroyed. At about 2 p.m., Hitler ate a simple vegetarian meal of pasta and vegetable broth. Witnesses said he looked pale and moved slowly. He shook hands with staff in the corridor. Some cried. With others, he avoided eye contact. Fatigue could explain that. Shame might as well. Or perhaps he had already retreated inward, focused on what he intended to do. Around 3:30 p.m., he and Eva Braun went into his private study. She sat on a sofa and bit into a cyanide capsule. He took a 7.65mm Walther pistol, raised it to his right temple, and fired. The shot sounded sharp but muted by concrete walls. When aides entered minutes later, they reported the smell of bitter almonds mixed with gunpowder. Braun's body remained upright. Hitler's head had dropped forward, blood visible near the chair. The scene, by those descriptions, was abrupt rather than theatrical. Instructions for what followed had already been issued. Their bodies were carried up a narrow staircase into the Reich Chancellery garden, while shells continued to fall. One detonated nearby as gasoline was poured from jerry cans. Roughly 200 litres were used in repeated attempts to ignite the remains. Flames rose briefly into the grey afternoon, while Martin Bormann and others offered quick salutes before hurrying back underground. The cremation was incomplete. Soviet troops later found charred remains in a shell crater. Identification relied heavily on dental records, confirmed by assistance from Hitler's dentist. Even then, bureaucracy had the last word. Inside the bunker, authority passed, briefly, to Joseph Goebbels. For one day, he was Reich Chancellor. On May 1st, he and his wife poisoned their 6 children and then killed themselves. The collapse did not hinge on a single gunshot. It unfolded step by step, almost as though the regime's internal logic kept running after its leader was gone. Those final 48 hours are sometimes framed as personal tragedy. That framing can blur the wider pattern. Hitler had long argued that if Germany failed, it deserved destruction. His March 19th Nero decree ordered infrastructure demolished so advancing forces could not use it. Bridges, power stations, rail lines, factories, all expendable within that reasoning. A negotiated surrender might have reduced civilian casualties in Berlin. Fighting continued street by street instead. Soviet losses in the Battle of Berlin reached into the tens of thousands. German military and civilian casualties were vast. The toll kept climbing even after the outcome had stopped being uncertain. Down in the bunker, authority structures held their shape. Rank remained intact. Orders were typed and signed. Reality narrowed, yet ritual persisted. The ending is often summarized as a dictator taking his own life in a concrete room. Accurate, but thin. What stands out just as much is continuity. Marriage certificate, political testament, succession order, cyanide test. Each step followed the same internal logic that had shaped the regime for years. The war that began with German troops crossing into Poland in September 1939 closed with gasoline poured into a shell crater in April 1945. No reversal arrived. No late revelation altered anything. There was documentation, poison, and one gunshot beneath a ruined capital. In those last hours, coherence seemed to matter more than survival. That impulse had marked the regime from its earliest rallies to its underground finale. The final 2 days did not contradict it. If anything, they clarified it.